All right, people, it's time. This is the year that you introduce your kids to horror. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my spooky season throwback reviews, and today we're diving back into the 80s with the horror film The Gate. And this is a film that I first watched when I was either 9 or 10 years old. I was a massive fan of the first Blade film when it came out, and either my dad or my mom at the time just kind of mentioned in passing, hey, you know that guy that plays the bad guy in Blade? He did a horror movie when he was a kid. I was the type of kid that loved movies and loved horror so much that all you had to do was give me a little nugget of interest, and I would go out and seek that movie out like Indiana Jones. Luckily, I didn't have to search too far because our local Family Video always had this film. It was one of those mainstays in the horror VHS section, but I first rented this and watched it and immediately fell in love with it. It became one of those movies that I recorded my own version of it and watched it continuously as a kid, and it's actually been a really long time since I've watched it, so it was pretty cool to revisit this one, and it's a perfect movie for Halloween spooky season for a variety of reasons that I'm going to get into. And the basic premise of this film is that you have a couple of young kids, best friends, who accidentally open up a gate to hell and release a horde of demons into their house through a hole in their backyard. Starting off with the positives for The Gate, one thing about it that I have grown to absolutely love and appreciate and cherish this movie for as I've gotten older, and especially after becoming a parent myself, is that I think The Gate might be the perfect gateway horror film for you to show people that aren't really into horror or don't have a whole lot of experience into horror, to give them enough of a taste of what the genre has in store for them, and would be a nice way for them to start to get interest in the genre as a whole. It's like an intro course. This is like your horror 101 session that you can give somebody. And most of that, I think, is geared even more perfectly towards young kids. And that's a question that I get on this channel all the time for those that know that I'm a parent is, hey, when did you introduce your kids to horror? What was the first movie that you showed them? How did they react? What's their favorite subgenre? What's the first couple of introductory movies that you should show them to kind of give them an idea what the genre is? And the funny thing about that is the answer really differs on every single kid. You know your kids better than I do and better than anybody who's commenting on YouTube does. And so you can get more of an idea on how much intensity they can take, what type of movies they're going to have more fun with. But I think that The Gate is a really good example of a movie that kind of has a little bit of everything, where you can really get a bit of a litmus test for what type of horror films your kids are going to respond to and maybe not respond so well to. The movie starts off very much as kind of just a coming-of-age film about a couple of 80s kids hanging out, getting into mischief, and it slowly starts to ramp up the horror and the fantasy as it goes on, with having more eerie, atmospheric things start to happen around the house, and then eventually having actual full-blown practical effect little demons running around. You even get a good amount of gore in this movie, which is really well done and holds up very well. And so I think it's a movie that it's not so intense out of the gate that I think a lot of kids who are timid about watching horror are going to put up those blockers or maybe lose interest or ask to watch something else. I think there's enough there to get them interested in the characters, get them interested in the fun vibes of the movie, and slowly we start to ratchet up how intense and how creepy things are as a nice little easy transition into what we all typically expect from a horror film.
You've been
And even on the more horrific half of the film, which is certainly the back half, I do think that there is enough of a goofy, campy tone here to where even the more intense sequences, the standout for me being the sequence with the two parents seemingly coming home and they're actually demonic entities that start to like melt and deteriorate in front of the kids. You get moments like that that ramp up the intensity, but then there's also something a little goofy and silly right behind that. And in my experience, that is the mix you have to get a kid into horror. Like my oldest, whenever I first got with my wife, they were convinced that he was not going to watch horror films. They were like, hey, he's never liked them. He's never really been interested in horror. He has nightmares. He can't do any of that. And I was like, I don't know. I think you guys might be convincing him he's more scared than he actually is. And so the first time that I actually had a chance to watch something one-on-one with him, I put on Fright Night, which is a movie that I would say is also a really good gateway horror film that has a good mix like this one. And what made it so successful was that it's a film that has intensity and creepy stuff and good scares in it, but also has has a lot of fun and a lot of camp and a lot of goofier elements. And I would ramp that up even more by cracking jokes throughout the film. And so watching The Gate by myself at night a couple of nights ago, it really did land for me that this movie has all of those tonal shifts just built right into the mix that is the perfect on-ramp for young horror fans, or should I say young prospective horror fans. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this film that I think is going to be something that appeals to all ages when they watch this is it really does have a good central trio of main characters here with Glenn, Al, and Terry. Now, a lot of 80s movies did tend to kind of build some of the caricatures and the cliches that we have since had umpteenth times since the 80s, but what stood out a little bit about The Gate to me is that you have these characters, these three central kids, that the movie really does do a good job at humanizing them. It doesn't just make them be these cliche characters of the annoying little brother and the bitchy older sister and the weird heavy metal friend, although Terry very much plays up that cliche in a way that I like. They really do avoid a lot of those annoying elements by having a lot of layers to them. Like, you understand that Glenn is a kid that has a little bit of that annoying little brother element to him, but he also just wants friendship. He wants his sister to maintain that closeness with him. You know, he doesn't want her to age out of being the older sister that she's always been with him. And he's get a little bit of that angst starting to grow in him with that young, almost preteen age. And even Al, who very easily could have been devolved into this bitchy sister that just wants to hang out with the popular clique and completely abandons her brother and has a party and neglects him and sends him up into his room while she's downstairs playing light as a feather, stiff as a board with all of her douchebag friends. You have elements that start to make you think she's going to be that character, but she very much surprises you throughout the runtime by choosing her brother and her responsibilities as a sister over all of these stupid little cliche, more superficial elements that we see in a lot of teenage characters. And even Terry as a friend, they do give him some good depth with having a little bit of trauma in his life as well, that the Gate and the demonic entities start to prey on him with, being the death of his mom. And he's somebody that has this big missing piece in his life where his dad's not really ever around. His mom is now completely gone because she's passed away. And so he very much has this closeness with Glenn, and even by association, I guess, a little bit with Al. And so it's a relationship, it's a friendship, it's a little bit of a dynamic with these three characters where right from the beginning, you're invested in them, you want to spend time with them, you enjoy going through the story with them, and as things start to ratchet up and get even more intense and crazier and a lot more demonic, quite literally, you really invest yourself in these kids being able to get through this, and you don't want any of them to become the human sacrifice. And it's done in a way where if you have a younger audience watching the film, they're obviously going to identify more with characters like Glenn and Terry and start to really identify with all of this annoyance towards the older characters and the teenage characters, and even how Al seems to be presented in the first third to half of the film. And then as you get older, you start to see more of Al's perspective, where you see kind of the mischief that the younger brother and the friend get into, and you see a character who has aged out of wanting to do things like build model rockets and wants to do more the more mature things with her friends, and you get all of that. And so, like most great acclaimed coming of age movies, you have a set of characters that their appeal is timeless, and it has a full family appeal. Beyond all of that, I will tell you one thing that I have always remembered this movie for that endeared me to it immediately is that scene with the character of Terry where he goes home for a sneeze and he's just jumping around on his bed, rocking out to heavy metal albums and putting like a bed sheet over his head and acting out like the Number of the Beast speech and shit. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I did that all the time as a kid.
In a time before the earth, before the sun, and before the light of the stars.
Something that I've already mentioned a couple of times that I really appreciate about The Gate is I think that the practical effects work in this movie is pretty damn good. Like, I think they were working with like $2.5 million, which certainly wasn't a whole lot back then. It's still not a whole lot now. And for the amount of practicality that they have in all the different ways that they visualize hell slowly starting to seep into our own world, I think they do a damn good job with having their creature effects and their gore effects, and certainly tapping into both horror and fantasy in some kind of an even mix. And even the atmosphere and the dread and that kind of eerie tone that they create in this film is done so well, whether it's the smoke and the fog coming out of the actual gate in the backyard, or, you know, intense sequences like the parent's face melting all over the ground, having things bust out of the walls that look like a corpse straight out of Night of the Living Dead. There's a whole bunch of different ideas at play here. And if if the most that you can say in a negative is that some of the stop motion effects are dated, whatever, you're doing pretty damn good. And just like with the practical effects and the things they're trying to visualize, I think that the story does a really good job with the way that it's paced out at kind of slowly making this demonic presence, the demonic threat, ramp up into a way where you're continuously teased that they have figured out a way to stop the threat. There's like 3 different points throughout the film where they have found the solution and they do something, and the movie does just enough to convince you that they have now overcome that issue. And it's only if you look at the remaining runtime do you start to snap back into reality and go, oh yeah, there's 35 more minutes in the film. I'm sure something else bad's going to happen. But watching it in real time as you're supposed to, you do really get to the point where you're like, oh cool, we saved the day. Wait, the credits aren't rolling. What the fuck's happening? And the last thing that I'll say here in the positive, which does add in with the effects and the atmosphere that they've created, is that I do think this movie has a really good synth score. You know, it was created by Michael Honig and J. Peter Robinson. You can listen to it on YouTube. It's got a lot of different variations to it, which again kind of blend the tone of what you expect from an 80s horror film with something that's leaning into more fantastical elements. And I think that it does a really good job at kind of having that nostalgic vibe to it, but also having that like synthwave edge that 80s movies, 80s horror especially, had a lot of in that era. And so it just really fits the tone of the film, and it just adds that extra little layer that you need to get you in the right headspace, to get the right emotions out of you when they're trying to create this slowly eerie build throughout the gate. Moving on to the mixed element, I have the experience of watching this as a kid, and my love for it as a kid growing into my appreciation of it as an adult is really what shaped why I think this is a perfect gateway horror film. But I could see this movie not being quite intense enough or not being horrifying enough to kind of onboard new adult or even teenage audiences, especially in today's age. You know, it's a movie that I think elements of it you could argue are maybe too kiddie, a little bit too PG-13 for adult audiences. And maybe even some parents would argue that once the film starts to go into the horror side, it goes a little bit too far in that direction for what they would want their kids to watch. So it just kind of brings us back to that classic debate of like, what age is the perfect age? What type of movies do you want to show your kids and when? And it all depends on the kid. But I could understand the argument of the tonal shift in this movie maybe being too extreme on both sides to get that happy medium and totally please either target audience. And now moving on to the negatives. And I think the elephant in the room that you have to address when you talk about a movie like The Gate that comes out in the late 80s is that it is a film that does feel a bit derivative of other things. You definitely can pick up some Poltergeist and some Spielberg vibes in there. You can definitely get some visuals from a few other films that came out a couple of years before. So it's not one of those horror films that's known for being something that was groundbreaking or broke the mold or introduced a concept or a character or a creature that has just stood the test of time. And I think part of that is the fact that it's a movie that feels very much like a couple of films that did do those things. You could also look at the story that they're telling here and say that there's not really a whole lot of depth here, which again kind of gives it a negative comparison to some of the other films that it is taking some liberties from that do have a lot more depth in them. This is very simple. It's a couple of kids unleash some demons, and the demons torment the kids, and the kids try to put the demons back in the hole. Like, it's a very simple concept. That doesn't mean that it's bad, but it's a very simple concept that never really graduates past that. There's not so much of a central theme. There's not so much of like this deep character arc going on with the character of Glenn that he resolves through this demonic entity and his interactions and battles with it. There's nothing really beyond just some cool effects, some fun characters. I also think that the movie does take a little while to really get going. As I said, it is a movie that slowly ratchets up the horror elements, which has its own benefits, but especially in today's age where it seems like more and more people need to be instantly hooked and have something within the first 15 seconds that absolutely drives them to watch the rest of it. Otherwise they click off or swipe to something else. It's a movie that does take a while to get to the more horrific stuff. You spend about half of the runtime with just kind of some teenage angst and some preteen boys and some of those friendship elements. It's a movie that doesn't really get to the central premise, the elevator pitch, the sales pitch of the movie, which is demons attacking these kids, until about 45 minutes to an hour in. But moving on to the two issues that I find to be the biggest low points in The Gate, one of which is that for as much as I appreciate the characterization and the writing writing that went into the 3 central characters of The Gate, it is beyond obvious that all of the other side characters in the film didn't get anywhere near that level of attention. All the teenage friends are total cliche douchebags and bitches, and none of them really get much of a personality. You don't remember any of their names. They're just there to be the annoying teenage caricatures and the irresponsible ones and the dumbass that starts the whole thing by throwing the dog into the hole. The 2 characters that almost look like twins that are just there to argue with, like, what, a 9-year-old, like a fucking infant, and even the parents, like, 80s movies were kind of one extreme or the other. You either got really great parent characters that told us a lot of great lessons that we still hold on to this day, or you get absolutely scumbag, douchebag parents that are just like there to be the ones that punish their kids. I mean, when you first meet the father in this movie, I was infuriated as a parent. You watch him walk into the backyard where the night previous, a massive thunderstorm has taken out this huge monstrous tree in their backyard, and he has this crew come and remove the tree that morning, all the way from the roots up, which always leaves this massive crater in the yard. And he walks back there and sees that it's an open hole that's seemingly bottomless. And he goes and immediately bitches at his young son and grounds him. He's like, "Motherfucker, you dug that big ass hole." How the hell did he dig that hole? That bitch goes halfway to China. Pull your head out of your ass, Dad. They're the type of 80s parents that only serve the purpose of having that one scene where they're like, "Bye guys, we're going on a business trip together for some fucking reason. Take care of each other and don't have any parties." And like all 80s kids, it's almost like the only reason that this happens is because the parents decided to say that on the way out. Like, we weren't going to invite people over, but that kind of sounds like a challenge. So guess what, Mom and Dad? It's party time! And the final negative that I have with The Gate, which has always been a big disappointment for me, is I've never liked the creative decision to have the big ultimate demonic entity, like the final boss of this movie, just be a gigantic version of the little drone demons that we've seen throughout the entire third act of the film. Like, why it didn't look more like the devil or have some other creature design to it. It just felt like a little creatively devoid to me. Like, you got these little anteater looking things running around as drones, and it's like, cool, that's a unique design for something that's this big, that's just out there doing the bidding of the big demon. And then when the big demon comes and he looks exactly the same, no.
Maybe I won't do that again.
Realistically, that was probably just a budgetary issue. They probably only made 1 or 2 of those models of that little drone character and just multiplied it to make it look like there's numbers of them in the movie, and then they just shot it to look extremely big for the finale. But that's the one thing, for as much as I like the practical effects in the movie and the creativity at play, it's like, could we not have gotten a better final demon? Like, damn. But overall, guys, I think The Gate holds up extremely well. I think it's a really fun movie that you can watch as a whole family during Halloween and spooky season. I think it's a great film to show your kids if they have not really gotten much experience with horror. And even as an adult, I think a lot of the elements of it are still very fun and nostalgic and hold up extremely well. So check it out this holiday season. Let me know what you thought about it, and be ready because I got plenty more throwback reviews coming at you before the 31st. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a review up here for Pumpkinhead that I did last week. Please check out that one. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.